So I found this little table online. Lady was getting ready to throw it away. It was heading to the dump. As you can see, it was kind of falling apart, little chips. The veneer on top of it was completely falling apart. The first thing I tried to do was fix the veneer on top, maybe hoping I could sand it down and maybe re-glue the edges, but it was just too far gone. So we had to scrape it all off. Here's me scraping like an idiot toward my arm. Fortunately, it's not a super sharp chisel, so I think we're okay. But anyway, the first step here was to just scrape the veneer clean as much as I could to lessen the amount of sanding that I would have to do later. Buzz, 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 buzz. We are sanding. If I remember right, I'm using a 80 grit sandpaper on this to really tear down into that wood. I would have loved to have been able to restain this entire project, but unfortunately that's just not going to happen at this point. The wood that's underneath the veneer is typically some cheaper wood, some softer wood, maybe some poplar and pine and that kind of thing. So it's not as high quality wood. There's a lot of pock marks and chips in it. There's a lot of variation in coloring, so there's really no point in trying to stain it unless you're kind of into that style. But for me, I just decided we're going to go ahead and paint this. Now, at the point where I'm working on it currently, I had no idea what I was going to do with this table just yet. All I knew is it needed to be prepped for paint. So I'm taking some just Dawn dish detergent and wiping it down really good, making sure it's nice and clean of all the dust. And of course, the next step is I create a bunch more dust. So I brought it inside where it was definitely a lot cooler. And it's time to start sanding. Sanding, sanding, sanding. Oh, how I love sanding. Sanding, sanding, sanding. It is my favorite. Especially when you're getting in between these tiny spindles. All the detail work is, well, let's just say it's fun. But the end result is totally worth the effort. There's a ton of buildup over time of dirt and just the top coat that was mostly on it, but not much anymore. A lot of that junk has to be completely stripped away, or at least scuffed up and scraped away to the point where it will take a coat of paint. Now I'm just in here with probably an 80 to 120, going back and forth, just making sure everything's smoothed out nice. Checking my phone once in a while, because Lord knows I can't stay focused to save my damn life. And like an idiot, I point the table your direction so that you can't actually see what I'm doing. But be assured, I am actually still working. There is things going on behind that tabletop. I promise you that. You're just going to have to take my word for it. Oh hell, I'll be nice and not make you watch 25 more minutes of me shaking a table back and forth in front of your face. Now the next step is to tighten up all the old screws. So I just came in with a flat tip screwdriver, checked every screw, tightened it on down. That's literally all that was wrong with it. The table was just loose over time and just needs a little bit of reassurance that everything's okay. I mean, we all just need to have our screws tightened every now and again. Pat on the back and light sanding to make sure that, we can get back up on that horse and keep going in life. Now, my first idea to tighten this thing down here was to use a pair of pliers, but unfortunately, apparently I don't have the hand strength to just grab this beast and turn. So, as you'll see here in a moment, I came up with another solution to try to fix this, because it still needed to be tightened. Yep, still wobblier than a 61-year-old man on a late-night trip to the toilet. But we can fix that. So I thought it was quite convenient that there's these nice little angled screws that went right into the bottom of the legs from underneath. And it almost tightened everything up nice. So to try to solve the problem, I found a pair of vice grips and adjusted them to the size of the square tip nut that was on the bolt there. And we stick a screwdriver in the jaws and just give it a nice little turn. Unclip the vice grips, clip it again, screwdriver in the jaws, and a quick little turn just like that. Now I was trying to be really careful because these things are old. There is some rust involved. I did not want to break this. The last thing I wanted to do was try to replace an old bolt like this. So we just took our time, and look at that. Already much more solid just from that one. Well, look at that. It's almost like she can stand on her own 6 legs again. So you know what's coming next, right? We got a little paint coming. Now, I took the spray bottle and moistened the top of the table just a little bit. The idea here is to water down the paint just a little bit so it goes on a little smoother. It's a trick I saw somebody use and figured I'd give it a shot. It actually did help, believe it or not. I've never used water with paint. I've usually just dipped it straight out of the can and started going. But this did actually give just a little bit smoother of a coat, so here we go. It kind of breaks my heart to start painting over all this nice pretty stain. But I'm also a rebel, so I kind of got over it pretty quick once I started seeing it all come together and look like one solid piece. And we just slowly work our way from top to bottom, hitting all the top trim around all the spindles. And as I went, this got much, much easier. I went from trying to paint in a up and down direction, thinking that the paint strokes had to go one direction, to realizing that it was much easier to use what I've seen referred to as the slap method to paint from side to side, perpendicular with the leg. And once I started doing that, my process started speeding up so much faster. And believe it or not, I do actually own some sawhorses. I could have put it up higher, but for some reason I just decided that this project, I was going to do it down on the floor, because I'm still a young strapping buck and I can handle it, I guess. Give it another 20 years and maybe my knees won't be able to handle this angle. Who am I kidding? Let's just give it 10. Painting each of these spindles did get quite tedious after a while, but as I kept going, just kept getting faster and faster at it. But I really wanted to make sure that there were no drips, because that becomes quite a challenge to fix later on down the road. So if you take your time, you keep an eye very close on everything, make sure there's no drips, everything will turn out just fine. Now, if you saw what I put underneath the table, there's these little triangular? That's a great word. There's these little triangular stands that you can put underneath your table that are for this kind of thing, where it minimizes the surface area that it connects with, and you're able to actually flip your table over, set them on them. Very minimal damage, if any, to your tabletop. I've never had any trouble with it. And you just go on to painting. You don't have to wait for it to dry and nothing like that. So you'll see I use them quite a few times in this process. And whenever I do one of these projects, I try to do the very best I can. I want this to be top quality. I want somebody to look at this piece and go, holy crap, that looks amazing. And so far, so good. Everybody I've shown this piece to has been completely amazed with it. I've already got it sold. Now, I realize I didn't necessarily have to paint underneath the table in this location, but I kind of thought it looked pretty cool, so I figured I'd just go ahead and do it. I mean, might as well. It gives a nice clean edge for the paint. It makes it look like you knew what you were doing, which we all know I don't. But that's another story. So we're going to give it one last flip over, and we're going to go ahead and hit up the bottom edges. little bottom tray there. And as you see, I'm kind of going back over some little spots, finding little areas that I might have missed while it was flipped over. And now we're going to give our first coat, our first primer coat, a good sand down. We want to get this thing smoother than a baby's butt going down a slip and slide lined with 220 grit sandpaper. Who am I kidding? This is 220 grit sandpaper, so it's exactly like a baby's butt going down a slip and slide lined with 220 grit sandpaper. And after a quick wipe down, we go ahead and head right on into our next coat. Now, I can typically get away with one coat of primer, but in this case, I decided to go for a second coat, mainly because the chalk paint that I'm going to be using later on ends up being $20 for a pint can versus like $23 for a gallon. It's considerably more expensive, but it does pay for itself in the long run. That being said, I went ahead and put a second coat of primer on it just to make sure that I had good coverage so that it would minimize the amount of gray paint I had to use later. And as you can see, the entire table is sitting up on top of those little triangular pieces that I was talking about before. This just helps me get paint onto the bottom of the legs without picking up junk that might come off of the drop cloth underneath. And there you have it. 2 coats of primer paint. It's looking great. It's been sanded down. We are ready to go. But after having painted both of those coats, I realized there was quite a few little spots in the top that I wanted to patch up. So I took some putty hole filler and went ahead and filled up some holes. Let that dry. And now we're heading into something really bold. We're going with an oil base flat black for the top. Now, I'm relatively new with oil-based paints, so this was probably the second or third project I've painted using oil base. It is a whole nother animal compared to acrylics. So as you can see, I sanded down in between coats, wiped it down real good, sprayed it, wiped it. Obviously, there's dry time in between these steps, but Lord knows that would make a long video if I made you watch the paint dry. And again, just spreading the paint, checking the edges for drips, and then I take and do long brush strokes all the way across to make sure it all looks nice. Not too shabby there. I'm really happy with the way this is turning out so far. Now we head on to the next step. Chalk gray. Now what I'm using here is the slap method with a little bit of chalked ultra matte paint, aged gray from Rust-Oleum. At my local hardware store, it was about $20 for a can. And so far, this is the second project I've been able to get out of this can. And I believe after it's done, I have around a half a can left. So it lasts for a decent amount of time for reasonably sized pieces of furniture. Here we go back at it again. Round 3 with the spindles. And this isn't like your normal table that has like 4 legs, like a normal human being. This has 6 legs, and miniature legs connecting it to a base in the middle. I would say she's a complicated table, but I wouldn't want to offend the audience. And applying this paint was rather satisfying, actually. It was a very subtle change from the white, but it was just what I needed to give it a nice base for the next step that's coming. I just don't think this would have looked nearly as good on flat white. But who knows? Lord knows I'm no expert. And we're rounding out the finishing touches on the bottom edge. Grabbing those spots I might have missed here and there. And we're ready for the next step. Now what I've done here is taken some basic craft acrylic black paint and mixed it with some water. Really, really watered this one down. You'll see it dripping like crazy as I run this brush across here. And just give it a nice, thick coating. Just slap that stuff on there. You ain't got to get it everywhere. You just got to get it on there. The goal here is to get it down into the little cracks and crevices. And control the drips as best as you can. And then I just take a wet rag. I used warm water for this and just run it right off. Give it a couple wipe downs. And just touch it up here and there wherever it has spots that might look like it's not quite natural. Now I'm just going to continue this process all the way through the rest of the base, painting one leg at a time because you do not want this stuff to dry any more than necessary. So I do this one step at a time, one leg at a time, small portions, just making sure that I don't get too far ahead of myself. That way I can come back, wipe it all down. And that black, wow, it really started to pull out some of those finer details in this table that would have easily been lost in the white if I'd have just left it that way. Which, don't get me wrong, it looked good as a simple black and white table, but this extra step just really gave it that extra something that it needed. I don't want pieces that look all right. I want to make pieces that make people's jaws hit the floor. Here's a close-up of just going back and wiping up some of the details that didn't quite get wiped down all the way. I think it came out looking so much better once I came back and fine-tuned everything, just wiped up any excess. And the last step is we come in and I show off my fine skills of cutting in with a brush. Steady hand. And I've seen plenty of tables that people have redone and you always look under the lip and they're never painted. They just kind of paint what's visible from the top. But this is where I'm a little different than most folks. I like to take the time to actually make it look nice. Make it look like there was some tender love and care that went into this thing. I mean, look how smooth that is. Tender love and care is the only way I can describe it. If you have better words, please drop them in the comments section below. But you gotta admit, that's damn satisfying right there. By the time I flip this thing back over, nobody will ever see it. But I'll know it's there. This step's for all those toddlers out there that are under about 2 foot high that are just checking out fine antique tables and critiquing their craftsmanship. Me, I just hit my head on tables that are a little bit too short. Now on this last step, I'm just applying a wax coat to the entire table as a protective top coat. This is a Krylon Chalky Finish Clear Sealing Wax. It's designed to create a low-gloss sealing, and it protects the chalky finish paint. However, I used it on top of the flat black oil-based paint as well, and it came out looking incredible. I think high shine furniture has its time and place, but this particular piece, I wanted more of a subtle shine to it. Nothing too terribly popping. I just wanted something that made the piece stand out and made the finer details show. And then I go back with a rag after I've put it all down and I wipe everything down. Now, I would recommend doing this Don't do it like I did. Do it in steps, much like the black wash from before. By the time I got back around to the top, it was really hard to wipe off because it had dried too much. And there you have it. There's the beautiful table. All those fine details in all of its splendor. Amazing. I was super happy with this one. Came out great. How many more accents can I touch on before we get to the... Oh, there it is. So we've got the before photo and the after photo. Quite the difference. And then we finished it up with some nice staging photos. And these are the ones that I sent off to all my friends and family to show off the pretty work that I did. It came out looking quite amazing. A very stunning piece, especially with some modern technology sitting right on top. It made everything just come together. I hope you enjoyed this video.